The mist was still clinging to the ground when she emerged, barefoot, trembling, her dress ripped in long, jagged tears like it had been clawed by something wild. Her hair, once neatly braided by a loving hand long forgotten, hung in tangled knots down her back. But it wasn't the state of her clothes that stopped the villagers cold. It was her eyes, wide, unblinking, staring ahead as if looking through them, not at them. Something in her gaze was wrong, not broken, not lost, just different, like whatever had been inside her before had been replaced with something ancient, something watching. Elena Matthews had vanished without a sound 7 nights ago, last seen just before dusk near the edge of the forest. Search parties had scoured every path, called her name until their voices gave out. Parents locked their doors. Children were kept close. And the whispers began again, of curses, blood debts, old things that slept beneath the roots. Just like they had when her mother disappeared years ago. Now, Elena was back, but she said nothing. Not to the tearful faces that greeted her, not to the elders who tried to question her, not even to her father who dropped to his knees the moment he saw her, crying out her name. She only walked, past the boundary stones, through the village square, toward her house. And as she passed, people stepped back, not because of her, but because they felt it, a shadow, a presence, as if something was following her, just out of sight, just behind her shoulder. And though they couldn't see it, they knew. Elena hadn't come back alone. What did she see in those woods, and what followed her back? Elena Matthews had always been quiet, the kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable. Not shy, not timid, just still. She moved through the village like a shadow, unnoticed, unless someone needed a reason to whisper. At 17, she had the kind of presence that made you look twice but pretend you didn't. The other girls called her strange. The older folks called her cursed. And the ones in between? They didn't call her anything at all. She lived in a crooked little house on the edge of Dallows Hollow, a superstitious village wedged between ancient hills and the endless green-black of the Gorin Forest. People in Dallow believed in signs, birds flying against the wind, dogs howling at the same hour, blood appearing where there should be none. But more than anything, they feared the woods. The forest remembers, they'd say. The forest does not forgive. Her mother had vanished into those trees when Elena was just 5. 1 minute she was there, brushing Elena's hair by candlelight, singing that lullaby with no real words. And the next, she was gone. No body, no scream, just gone. The villagers claimed it was madness, that the forest had called her, just like it had claimed others in the old days. Her father never spoke about it, not once. He closed himself off like a shuttered house, burying himself in silence and superstition. His love became a cold thing. Protective, yes, but more like a man guarding a secret than a father watching over his daughter. Elena grew up under the weight of that silence, carrying it like a second skin. She stopped asking questions, stopped trying to be noticed. But inside, a storm churned. She didn't want to be forgotten, faded like a worn name on a gravestone. She wanted to be seen, to be known, to understand why the trees called her in her dreams, why their shadows danced differently when she passed. She found comfort only in nature. The forest terrified her, yes, but it also listened. It felt alive. When she was there, it was like the air breathed with her, like she wasn't alone. She started sneaking past the border stones, slipping into the trees when no one was watching. Not far, not deep, just enough to taste the freedom, enough to pretend, for a little while, that she belonged somewhere. What she longed for most was what the village would never give her: freedom from the past, from the whispers, from being the daughter of a woman who walked into the woods and never came back. She feared dying the same way. But more than that, she feared living her whole life invisible. Each day in Dallow felt the same: gray skies, Gray stairs, gray silence. Elena moved through it all like a ghost still tied to the world by thin, fraying thread. Her father, once tall and proud, had grown stooped with invisible burdens, his voice now little more than grunts and orders. Don't go near the forest. Don't talk to them. Don't ask questions. His eyes, once gentle, now flickered with paranoia, watching the tree line from the window like he expected it to grow teeth and devour them both. But it wasn't the trees that made Elena uneasy. It was what lay beneath the silence. The feeling that something was listening. She tried to be normal, to exist in the narrow lanes of village life, but the stairs followed her like shadows. At school, her desk was always the last chosen. The other girls called her witch's blood and passed notes laced with cruel rhymes. Your mom heard voices. Now she's gone. Will you follow when they call? Even the teachers treated her like glass, too fragile to handle, too strange to ignore. Every time her name was called in roll, it rang like a warning. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but the loneliness dug deep, carving hollows in her chest that no words could fill. Then came the whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind, soft murmurs at the edge of her sleep, curling around her like smoke. But soon they grew clearer. Elena, come see. Remember, the voice was always soft, always female, and always hers. She didn't recognize it, and yet she did, like a lullaby from a childhood she had buried. Then came the dreams. Every night, the same. The forest floor soaked with moonlight, trees twisting in unnatural shapes, their bark writhing with faces. Sometimes she walked a path lined with red thread, always ending at a clearing where a woman stood with her back turned. The woman never moved, never spoke, but her presence was suffocating. Elena would wake up in sweat, hands clenched around bed sheets, heart galloping in her chest. Stranger still were the drawings, scribbles in the margins of her notebooks, symbols she didn't understand, faces she'd never seen, eyes that seemed to follow her long after she shut the book. Once, she found a sketch of a tall black tree with roots like reaching fingers. Beneath it, a girl knelt, and the caption scrawled below read, "She hears you now." Elena didn't remember drawing it, but the handwriting was hers. More and more, she felt pulled, like a thread in her chest tugged toward the woods with invisible hands. She stood at the edge sometimes, just staring into the gloom, heart pounding with a mix of fear and longing. Something ancient was waiting, something she couldn't name, but it knew her. It called her name, not in words, but in feeling, in dream, in wind. And it wasn't just calling. It was remembering. It happened on a gray morning soaked in dew, when the mist hung so low it blurred the lines between dream and waking. Elena had slipped from the house before dawn, feet moving without thought, pulled as if the forest had wrapped invisible strings around her ankles. Her breath clouded the air, and each step into the woods felt like sinking deeper into something older than memory. Then she saw him. He stood between two ancient oaks, arms crossed, golden light glinting through the mist behind him. He couldn't have been much older than her, maybe 18. But there was something off about him. Not dangerous exactly, just unplaceable, like he belonged to a different time. His hair was dark, unruly. His skin seemed to shimmer slightly when the light hit it. And his eyes, amber, bright and ancient, held the weight of things that should not be known. "Elena," he said, not as a greeting, but as a fact, like he'd been waiting. She froze. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer directly. He just tilted his head, watching her like a puzzle that was slowly solving itself. "You've been feeling it, haven't you? The pull, the waking." Elena's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about? You're not just her daughter," he said softly. "You're the key. Your bloodline was never meant to stay buried." Something about his words cracked through her fear, like sunlight breaking frost. He saw her, not as a shadow, not as a cursed girl, not as a rumor, but as someone real, as someone important. And though her heart pounded in her chest, she felt something else bloom behind the fear, a strange, dangerous hope. Before she could speak again, he stepped back into the fog, vanishing without a sound, as if the woods had swallowed him whole. When Eleanor returned home, the world felt different, more alive. The trees seemed to lean closer and her skin hummed with electricity. Something in her had shifted. For the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. But that hope was short-lived. At dinner, she mentioned the boy. Just his eyes, just in passing, and her father's spoon clattered against the table. His face turned to stone. "You went into the woods?" he growled. "You talked to it?" His knuckles whitened. "You think this is a game? You think they care about you?" When she didn't answer, he slammed his fist against the table hard enough to crack the wood. She flinched, the moment hanging heavy in the air. He didn't speak again, just got up and left the room, the door slamming behind him like a warning. The next day, whispers followed her again, new ones, sharper. The baker's wife wouldn't meet her eyes. A red symbol was painted on their door by morning. "Forest marked," someone muttered as she passed. She started feeling it everywhere. Eyes that weren't there, cold wind with no source, shadows that didn't move with the sun. But worse than all of it was what she felt inside. Like something buried beneath her ribs was stirring, stretching, remembering its name. And it wasn't afraid. It was the seventh night, the seventh time she woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the whisper echoing through her skull like a scream folded in velvet. "Come now, it's time." Eleanor sat up in the dark, her breath shallow, her hands shaking. She could still feel the pressure on her chest, like something had been sitting there, watching, waiting for her to open her eyes. Her window, though closed, rattled faintly as if the wind was trying to speak. Down the hall, her father's snoring stopped for a moment, then resumed, guttural, harsh. The bruise on her arm, still raw from the night before, pulsed under her sleeve. That argument had ended in silence, like they always did. Only this time, the silence screamed louder than his rage ever could. She didn't pack. She didn't write a note. There was nothing she needed to say that hadn't already been ignored. By the time her feet touched the edge of the forest, the sky had barely begun to bleed pale blue. Fog curled along the ground, hiding roots like bones. The trees loomed, their branches outstretched like they'd been waiting to welcome her. She stepped in. It was colder than before, quieter too. The normal forest sounds had vanished, replaced by a low hum that throbbed through her bones. She followed it blindly, as though pulled by a current she couldn't see. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time no longer felt real. Then she saw him. The boy? He stood by a blackened tree, his amber eyes brighter now, almost glowing. But there was something different. His body flickered slightly at the edges, like it didn't belong entirely in this world. "You came," he said, his voice gentler now. "I wasn't sure you would." Eleanor swallowed hard. "What are you?" He smiled, not cruel, but ancient. "Not what. When. I'm something forgotten, something buried with stories too dangerous to survive. But you're the last thread. Your mother tried to sever it, but it's still tied to you." He stepped closer, and the forest seemed to pulse with every footfall. "They lied to you, Elena. All of them. Your blood remembers, and it's calling you home." Her heart pounded. Her body screamed to run, but her soul leaned forward. She didn't understand, not fully, but something inside her did. The dreams, the drawings, the whispers, they weren't madness. They were memory, inheritance, destiny. Behind him, the trees parted unnaturally, revealing a path of stone, twisted with roots, slick with dew, leading into a darkness so deep it swallowed light. The heart of the forest. No one who entered it had ever returned. It was the place of endings, of beginnings. "This is the last choice," the knot boy said, Once you step in, you don't come back the same. If at all, Elena looked back, once, toward the village she had never belonged to, toward the house that had never been a home. Then she looked forward and stepped into the dark. The moment Elena crossed the threshold, the forest swallowed her. The air changed. It thickened, slowed, turned syrupy and strange, like she was walking underwater. Sound dulled. Her footsteps echoed even though she walked on moss. Trees here were unlike any she had seen, towering, twisted, their bark streaked with crimson veins that pulsed like a heartbeat. Time unraveled. It might have been hours, days, or seconds. She couldn't tell. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to whisper, not from around her, but from within her, voices she'd never heard before, but somehow recognized. Lullabies in languages she didn't know. Screams that belonged to someone she'd never been. And then the forest showed her. Not like a dream. Like truth. She stood outside her childhood home, small and frightened. The night her mother died, or what she thought was death. She watched it unfold, helpless. Her mother running into the woods, eyes wild, not with madness, but fear. Her father, stone-faced, watching the tree line, villagers behind him, holding lanterns, whispering ancient words like a prayer and a curse in one breath. They didn't chase her. They let her go. Not because she was lost, but because she was the offering. The forest demanded blood, and when it chose, the village obeyed. Elena screamed at them, begged them to stop. But her voice couldn't pierce the memory. She pounded the air, and it cracked like glass. She fell through it. Now she stood in the clearing, her mother's last known place. But she wasn't alone. A figure waited in the mist. She was older now, thinner, her face translucent and pale like ash. Her eyes held the same deep sadness that Elena carried in her chest like an old bruise. "Mom?" The figure turned, smiled faintly. "My little light," she whispered, her voice fraying like old cloth. "You weren't supposed to come." Elena ran to her, but her arms passed through. The air was cold where her mother stood. "Why didn't you fight?" Elena asked, tears falling freely. "Why didn't you come back?" "I tried," her mother said, voice shaking. "But the forest doesn't let go easily. And when I broke, I couldn't find the way." Elena sank to her knees. The weight of it, of knowing her entire life had been shaped by this lie, crushed her. Her mother hadn't gone mad. Her mother had been sacrificed, and they had lied. Her father, the village, all of them. They had watched her suffer, grow up haunted, while the truth festered in silence. A fog rose around her, cold, thick, numbing. "I could stay," she whispered, "with you. Let it end here. Maybe I was never meant to leave." The spirit knelt beside her, brushed invisible fingers through her hair. "That's what the forest wants. It feeds on forgetting. It wants you to surrender." And for a moment, she almost did. But then she remembered. The amber-eyed boy, his voice echoing in her mind like fire in a cave. "You are the last light in the dark. If you fall, we all fall." She lifted her head. She looked around through the fog, the pain, the lies, and she stood, shaking, broken, but burning. "I'm not staying," she whispered. "Not in the forest, not in the past, not in the silence that had killed her mother." And something, deep in the woods, screamed. Elena stood in the middle of the clearing, her breath curling in the cold air. The last of her tears dried into salt on her cheeks. Her mother's form had begun to fade again, drawn backward into the shadows like mist returning to the sea. But this time, Elena didn't reach out. This time, she stepped forward. "Wait," she said to the forest, not pleading, not begging, but commanding. The roots beneath her feet curled in attention. The trees stilled. The wind held its breath. "I know what you are," she whispered, not just to the trees or the shadows, but to the thing that lived within them, the ancient hunger that fed on grief, silence, and forgotten bloodlines. You don't want to sacrifice anymore, she said. You want a voice. The earth trembled. The wind responded, not in words, but in understanding. A sound not heard, but felt. It thrummed deep in her bones like a heartbeat not her own. The forest answered, and it came forward. From the rotted bark and bone-soaked roots, from the oldest tree, blackened and wide as a cathedral, a shape emerged. Neither beast nor god, but something between. Its form was ever shifting. Antlers, feathers, human hands, hollow eyes. Its voice was not a sound, but a presence in her mind. You are not like the others. I never was, Elena said, her voice steady. What do you want, blood daughter? She met the being's gaze, if it had eyes, and said, Free them. My mother, the others, everyone you've taken. Release them from your hunger, and I will carry your voice beyond these trees. I will be your story, your warning, your balance. The forest groaned. A wind like 1,000 whispers blew outward, and from the trees they came. Spirits, dozens, maybe hundreds, women in faded dresses, children, men, people the village had forgotten, dismissed as mad or cursed. Some were only fragments, faces held together by memory, but they were real. Her mother stood among them, this time not fading, not weeping. The ancient being leaned in. You will carry more than words. I know, Elena said. You will never be the same. I'm not asking to be. A pause, then, so be it. The clearing filled with light, not golden or pure, but fierce and wild, like fire without flame. When Elena stepped out of the heart of the forest, the sun was rising, casting long golden beams through the trees. But she did not walk alone. Behind her, the spirits moved, silent, watchful, free, and within her, something walked too. A fire older than time, a sorrow so deep it sang, a voice that was hers, and something far greater. She was no longer just Elena. She was what the forest had become, and she was coming home. The bells rang before anyone saw her. It was old Mara who cried first, her voice cracking like dry kindling. She's come back. They all spilled into the square, dozens of them, their breath visible in the cold morning light. Mothers clutched children. Elders shuffled forward, faces white with dread. Men muttered prayers they hadn't spoken in years. And at the center of it all, Elena, barefoot, silent. Her hair was longer now, darker. Her eyes were not hers anymore. They belonged to something older, something deeper than the bones of the village. The wind curled around her like it was drawn to her body, and though no one could see them clearly, they felt the others walking behind her. The dead had come home. She didn't say a word, at least not at first. She just stood there, staring at the people who had once ignored her, shunned her, lied to her face. She stared at the elders who had known, the ones who had watched her mother vanish and had said nothing. And then she spoke. But the voice wasn't just hers. It was layered, ancient. It echoed from the ground itself, from the trees that loomed on the horizon, from the sky gone suddenly dark with clouds. You fed the forest with your silence. No one breathed. You made deals in the dark and called it protection. Whispers broke out. One of the elders stepped forward, trembling. We did what we had to. You don't understand. Elena raised her hand. The earth rumbled. Roots burst from the cobblestones, snaking, pulsing, alive. Ivy climbed the walls. The trees at the edge of the village moved, not with wind, but with intent. The forest was waking up. From behind her, the spirits came, translucent figures, hollow faces, the lost, the sacrificed, the forgotten. Her mother stood among them, eyes full of quiet sorrow. Panic spread. A woman dropped to her knees, sobbing. A man screamed and ran, only to be stopped by the roots curling around his ankles. Elena didn't flinch. You knew, she said, her voice cracking now, not from weakness, but fury. You knew what happened to my mother. You let it happen, and you let it happen again, over and over, generation after generation, just to keep your little world safe. Someone shouted, "We didn't have a choice." She stepped forward. You did. You just chose cowardice over truth. The sky cracked, thunder without lightning. The wind turned violent. The trees groaned, and then a sound, small, a child's whimper. Elena turned her head. At the edge of the crowd stood a little girl, barely 6, big brown eyes, a tattered blue coat. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't praying. She was just watching, eyes wide with fear. The same fear Elena had once felt when no one protected her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Elena remembered who she was before the forest. A child, a daughter, a girl who once believed in mercy. She raised her hand. The roots stopped. The forest stilled. Silence fell over the village like a heavy shroud. Then, Elena spoke once more. I will leave you one truth. She turned her gaze on the elders, the ones who still clung to their false innocence. You will remember us. You will speak our names, every moon, every year, or the forest will return. And next time, it won't stop at your walls. She stepped back, the spirits forming a circle around her like a crown, and without another word, she turned toward the trees. The crowd parted like water before her. Elena disappeared into the forest, not as a sacrifice, not as prey, but as a force, as its voice and its warning. A year passed like a long exhale. The village was no longer the same, not in the way that buildings crumble or paths grow over, but in the quieter shifts, the silences between conversations, the way people looked toward the forest with something more than fear, something like reverence or guilt. Where there had once been suspicion and superstition, there was now memory and a fragile kind of truth. The elders no longer held counsel in secret. They spoke openly of what had been buried for generations, of the sacrifices made in silence, of Elena and her mother before her, and those who had come before even them. At the edge of the forest, they built a shrine, not large, not ornate, just a ring of stones, a carved wooden totem, and 2 names etched into the grain: Mariel, mother; Dreamer, taken; Elena, daughter; Fire, returned. Offerings were left daily: wildflowers, feathers, bread, poems written in a child's hand. No one was told to do it. It just began, as if the forest itself asked for remembrance, and the village, humbled, obeyed. Children said they sometimes saw her, not clearly, not enough to frighten, just enough to wonder. A girl in white at dusk, standing between the trees, eyes shining like embers. Sometimes she walked with wolves. Sometimes the trees seemed to lean toward her as she passed. No one chased her. No one called her name. They knew better now. The forest no longer took, but it watched, and in that stillness, in that breath between past and future, the village finally learned to listen. Elena was gone. But she was not lost. She was not alone. She never had been. Sometimes the ones we cast out are the very ones who come back carrying the truths we're too afraid to face. If Elena's story touched something inside you, if you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or alone, please share your thoughts below. Your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to remember. The forest forgets no one.